He was just a kid with a pencil. Locked away, forgotten, invisible. Until one sketch smuggled out of a prison made the entire U.S. Congress fall silent. They didn't know his name, but now they can't ignore his voice. A congressional hearing on prison oversight had just entered its third-hour charts, numbers, testimonies, until the youngest representative in the chamber stood, but didn't speak. Instead, he held up a single piece of paper. A drawing. Charcoal on cream cardstock. Rough, jagged lines. But unmistakably human. It showed a man, eyes swollen, lips split, blood pooling near the collar of a standard-issue prison uniform. The sketch wasn't dramatic. It was intimate. And that's what made it horrifying. Gasps rippled across the room. One aide dropped her pen. Another whispered, "Is that real?" The representative spoke, his voice even. "This is not a photo. There are no photos. Because cameras weren't allowed. Because the cell where he died was declared secure and sealed. But someone was there. Someone saw. And someone drew." He turned the sketch around for the record. Held it there. Not as evidence. As indictment. There is no case file. No trial. No appeals. Just a man whose name you don't know. And an artist you've never met. Because he's not in this room. He's in a cell. The room fell even quieter. And somewhere, behind the wall of flashbulbs and paperwork, the ghost of a pencil mark was starting to scream. No one spoke. Not the board. Not the press. Because in a town obsessed with voice, what stopped everything was a line of silence drawn in charcoal. The congressman placed the sketch gently on the table. "The artist is 17, he said. Incarcerated at age 16. No legal representation. No appeal process. No visitors in over a year." A few heads turned. Some shuffled papers, looking for a name that wasn't there. He wasn't charged with murder. He was charged with presence. He was simply in the wrong room when something terrible happened. The silence thickened. Then the congressman leaned in. "I want you to remember his name, because you've already forgotten him once." He looked straight into the cameras. Khalil Moore. The name hit the room like a gavel. Not because it was loud, but because it didn't belong on a docket. It belonged in a sketchbook. And somehow that sketchbook had made its way to Congress. But no one knew how. No one knew who had smuggled it out. Or why this one drawing out of hundreds had made it this far. All they knew was this. It wasn't just a drawing. It was testimony. And the person giving it was still behind bars. Before he became a number, before he was a file buried in a county clerk's drawer, Khalil Moore was just a kid who liked to draw. Pencil on paper. Sometimes on his jeans. Sometimes on the walls of his bedroom until his mother would scold him not for drawing, but for running out of space. He'd sketch anything. A cracked window. A basketball mid-air. Faces. Especially faces. "Your eye don't just see," his grandfather once told him. "It remembers." And Khalil remembered everything. By 16, he was better than most art students twice his age. But his school had no budget for art supplies. So he drew with whatever he could find, broken pencils, borrowed pens, the backs of flyers from the corner store. Then came the fight. A store robbery Khalil didn't commit. A camera that caught shadows but no clarity. 3 boys running 2 white, 1 black. Only 1 arrested. The public defender had 6 other cases that day. The judge gave the minimum explanation. Khalil gave up speaking. They said he fit the description. They said he refused to cooperate. And with no one to advocate, the system did what it does best. Moved on. He was 16 when he was sentenced. 17 when he stopped counting the days. Now, his sketchbooks were stitched together from commissary scraps. His canvas, envelopes, legal pads, toilet paper pressed flat and dried in secret. But his eye still remembered. The cell block was loud, but inside his mind, there was quiet. And in that quiet, he built worlds. He watched people, not out of fear, but fascination. How a man's posture changed when the guards walked by. How someone's hands trembled just before sentencing was read over the phone. How a laugh could sound like a cry if you drew the mouth just slightly wrong. Khalil didn't have therapy, didn't have programs, didn't even have pencils half the time. But he had a talent that refused to be caged. So he drew, mostly at night, mostly in pieces. He'd trade packets of sugar for graphite stubs. He'd carve makeshift erasers out of shoe soles. He'd slip drawings under doors like secret messages. And the men, the forgotten, the condemned, the broken, they came to him. "Draw me," they'd say. "Make me look how I used to be." Or sometimes, "Make me look like I matter." He never said no, because each sketch was a rebellion, a refusal to let the system erase them completely. He never signed his name, not out of fear, but because he wanted the focus to be on them, not the boy behind the pencil. But the truth was this: every time he brought someone back to life on paper, he brought a little bit of himself back too. And though no one outside those concrete walls knew it yet, Khalil Moore wasn't just drawing people. He was drawing a record, a reckoning, and one day, a revolution. It started with one drawing. A man named Rafi, in for a charge he swore he didn't commit, asked Khalil to sketch his daughter from memory. He hadn't seen her in 9 years. He described her for 20 minutes, the curve of her nose, the dimple in her cheek, the way her hair never stayed in a bun. Khalil didn't interrupt. He just listened. And then he drew. The next night, Rafi sat on the edge of his bunk, staring down at a folded piece of paper like it was a time machine. "She looks just like her," he whispered. Then he pressed it to his chest and cried. Word spread, quietly but quickly. One by one, inmates began to approach Khalil. Not with swagger, not with threats, but with hope. They didn't want to be drawn strong. They didn't want to be drawn innocent. They just wanted to be remembered. To look human. For someone, somewhere. Khalil complied. He stopped sketching from imagination and started sketching from life. Wrinkles, burns, crooked teeth, hands that shook, eyes that didn't. He called it his ghost gallery, because no one outside would ever see it. Or so he thought. He hid the drawings with care, tucked between outdated legal books, stuffed into hollowed-out Bibles, taped behind radiator grates in the laundry hall. Each one a face with no file. Each one a person the world had stopped keeping track of. No captions. No names. Just the truth shaded, cross-hatched, and smuggled into permanence. Khalil didn't know why he kept going. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was resistance. Maybe it was the only kind of truth he was still allowed to tell. But one thought repeated in his mind as he worked. If they're going to forget us, let me be the one who remembers. And so he did. Some of the men offered trades. A pack of ramen. An extra pair of socks. A story they hadn't told in years. But Khalil never charged. He said payment came in the form of memory and the trust to carry it. He drew slowly, deliberately, never rushed, even when time wasn't on their side. One man, Javier, asked him to draw his mother not from a photo, but from the way he remembered her sitting on the porch, shelling peas with a cigarette between her fingers. Another wanted to be drawn as he was before prison, before the tattoos, before the broken nose, before the stare that never softened. Khalil obliged. But he didn't erase the pain. He folded it into every line. There was power in paper. Because paper couldn't lie. It couldn't be redacted. It couldn't be beaten into silence. And Khalil had learned long ago, if the truth couldn't speak, it would draw. He started sketching in series. The innocents, the fathers, the forgotten, The dead men walking inmates on death row whose families had stopped visiting years ago. One by one, he catalogued the faces. Not as protest, as witness. And though no warden knew his name, and no guard stopped to ask why his mattress was unusually stiff, inside those folds, Khalil was building something larger than himself. A record. A rebellion. A gallery no one knew existed, waiting, patiently, for someone on the outside to find the key. It happened on a Tuesday. Elena Vargas, part-time librarian at Fulton Correctional Facility, was shelving outdated law books no one touched. Section 3, B Case Law and Sentencing Reform. As she reached for a misfiled volume, something slipped out and fluttered to the floor. At first, she thought it was scrap of folded flyer or commissary receipt, but when she bent to pick it up, the texture caught her. Not standard paper. Thicker, pressed, worn. She unfolded it. A face stared back at her, drawn in graphite so detailed it almost blinked. Lines mapped with precision. The shading around the eyes bruised, deliberate. Lips cracked. Cheekbones sharp. It wasn't art. It was evidence. She looked around. The room was empty. No cameras in this aisle. No noise. Her pulse picked up. She'd worked here 3 years. Seen plenty of scribbles. Doodles. But this was careful. Intentional. Real. She slipped the drawing into her notebook. Didn't tell anyone. Not yet. But that night, long after she clocked out, she sat at her kitchen table, turned the drawing under soft lamplight, and whispered to no one, "Who drew you?" Elena couldn't shake the eyes in the drawing. The next morning, she returned early, unlocked the library, closed the door behind her, and laid the portrait flat across her desk. There was something eerily familiar about the man's face, not the features exactly, but the bruises. The swelling under the left eye. The deep creases like rope burns across the neck. Then it hit her. 3 aisles away was a corkboard where inmates' deaths were listed, small notices. No photos. She scanned the most recent name. Antoine L. Mason, deceased. The 7th of March. Cause: cardiac failure. But Elena remembered that week. There'd been whispers. Screams echoing down the hallway after lights out. An ambulance that didn't turn on its sirens until after it left. She opened the internal memo folder, scrolled. No photos. No autopsy report. No mention of injuries. But the man in the drawing, he had injuries. Ones someone had seen and preserved in silence. Elena looked down again. This wasn't a sketch. It was testimony. And whoever drew it wasn't just talented. They were documenting what the prison had buried. Elena couldn't stop thinking about the drawing. The shading. The precision. The way the eyes seemed to follow her even after she folded the paper away. This wasn't casual. It wasn't practice. It was witness work made by someone who'd seen what no report had captured. She began searching, not officially, just carefully. On her breaks, she'd reshelve books that hadn't been touched, thumb through dictionaries with torn covers, tap the backs of hollowed-out volumes. 3 days later, her fingers found a slit behind a stack of outdated medical guides. She tugged gently. Something shifted. A folder, thick with folded papers, fell into her hands. She looked around, still alone. Inside, faces. Dozens of them. Drawn in pencil, charcoal, pen when graphite ran out. Some smiling, most not. Men of every shade, every age. Lines etched deep in their skin. Some with scars. Some with tears. None of them signed. None of them named. But all of them real. She flipped page after page, breath-catching. One man had a feeding tube. Another had a Bible half erased in his hands. She found one that made her stop. It was Rafi. The man who died the month before ruled a suicide. But in the sketch, his hands were bound behind him. Elena stared at it, hands trembling. These weren't drawings. They were records. And someone, somewhere inside this prison, was building a gallery no one had asked for. And no one dared to look at. Until now. Elena didn't sleep well that night. She kept seeing their eyes, dozens of them, staring up from the table in her small kitchen. She knew what it meant to work in a place like this. Keep your head down. Don't get involved. Survive your shift and go home. But now, she couldn't unsee what she'd found. So she made a choice. The next day, she brought a portable scanner tucked in her bag, the kind you could feed paper through one at a time. Quiet, untraceable. She came in early, stayed late, and when no one was around, she began. One drawing at a time. Slide. Scan. Save. Repeat. She labeled each file by the emotion it carried. Resigned 01, Anger 04, Prayer 09. She didn't know their names, but she knew their faces. And that was something. At home, she printed out copies in high resolution, storing them in a locked drawer, away from curious eyes. Each night, she stared at them longer. Not as drawings, but as evidence. Of neglect. Of brutality. Of stories never told because the people in them were considered disposable. By the end of the week, she had 47 portraits scanned and saved. A silent archive of grief, resolve, and erasure. She didn't know who the artist was, not yet. But she knew this. Whoever he was, he had done what no one else dared. He had remembered the forgotten. And now, she would make sure someone remembered him. The folder sat on her desk for 3 days. Elena stared at it every night before bed, the high-resolution scans, neatly labeled, tucked inside a plain manila envelope. No signature, no names, just 47 faces and one truth. Someone had to see them. She thought about going public herself. Quitting. Blowing the whistle. But she knew how that story usually ended. Fired. Discredited. Threatened. She needed someone bigger. Someone who already had a platform. That's when she remembered Inside Voices, the nonprofit project she'd followed since college. They published art and stories from incarcerated individuals. They exposed systemic abuse through creativity, not shouting. It felt right. So, one Sunday morning, she drove to a post office 2 towns away. Used gloves. Paid in cash. No return address. Inside the envelope, she placed the drawings, a flash drive of the scans, and a single note. These men were never seen. But someone saw them. Now you can too. She didn't sign it. Didn't need to. She slipped the envelope into the mail slot, waited for the soft thunk as it landed inside the bin, and walked away without looking back. That night, for the first time in weeks, Elena slept, because now the gallery wasn't just hidden in a prison library. It was moving. And somewhere, she hoped, it was headed into the light. The hearing was routine. Another subcommittee on prison oversight. Fluorescent lights. Lukewarm coffee. Stacks of forgotten reports. Until someone wheeled in a black foam board and unveiled what would not be forgotten. A sketch. Not a photo. Not a diagram. But a drawing large, precise, almost defiant. It showed a man in a prison uniform, mid-30s, face swollen, a split lip, bruising beneath the jawline as if someone had wrapped something around his neck and pulled. The detail was impossible to ignore. It wasn't stylized. It was surgical. The congressman holding the pointer cleared his throat. This is not fiction. This is Antoine L. Mason. Date of death, the 7th of March. Official cause, cardiac failure. He stepped forward, tapping the bruised area on the drawing. But multiple eyewitnesses described hearing him scream for help. Described guards dragging him down a hallway. Described blood. He clicked the remote. Next slide. A blank page labeled Incident Report Missing. And yet, he continued, every record tied to those events gone. Redacted. Lost. He gestured back to the drawing. This came to us anonymously, and yet it contains every detail the state failed to record. Gasps. Rustling of papers. One journalist in the back raised her phone, recording silently. This may not be admissible evidence, the congressman said, but it is moral evidence. And someone, somewhere, needs to answer for it. The image of the sketch went viral within 48 hours, not because it was trending, but because it was haunting. Shared by journalists, artists, activists, captioned only with, "Who drew this? Who saw what the system erased?" Major outlets picked it up. CNN, The Atlantic, ProPublica. Inside Voices, stunned by the reach, issued a public statement. We received the artwork anonymously. We do not know the artist's name. We only know this. Every face he drew matches a real man, many of whom are now gone. That last word echoed. Gone. The public wanted answers. Reporters followed the trail back to Fulton Correctional, where the drawings had been postmarked. Requests for access were denied. Records were confidential. Staff gave canned answers. No one had seen anything. No one remembered any inmate who could draw like that. But whispers started moving behind the walls. A few former inmates recognized the style. That's his. The quiet one. The kid with the eyes. But no one could give a name. His drawings had never been signed. His paper was untraceable. He never appeared in the prison newsletter or on any art contest list. He had hidden himself too well. And maybe for good reason. One journalist wrote, "We live in a time when every act is documented. But somehow, this boy, whoever he is, has painted truth into history without asking for credit or safety." And so the mystery deepened. The world knew the work, but not the hand that made it. And somewhere behind bars, the boy who remembered everyone was the one no one could find. Inside Voices had questions. The envelope had been postmarked from Fulton Correctional. That much they knew. The artwork wasn't mailed by an inmate. No one inside had access to private outbound mail like that. Which meant someone on staff had helped. They narrowed it down quickly. One department, one name, Elena Vargas. She wasn't listed in any of the public directories. Just a small mention as a library assistant in an old PDF staff roster. They reached out carefully. No press. No accusation. Just a message sent through encrypted email. "We believe you may know the artist. We don't need a name. We just want to help protect him and his work." Elena didn't reply. For 3 days, nothing. But then, at the Inside Voices mailbox in D.C., another envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, a single USB drive, labeled only with a small strip of tape. "You're not wrong." On the drive, high-resolution scans. All 47 original drawings, with metadata dates, categories, sequence. Plus one new folder titled Lost But Not Gone. Inside that folder, a final image. A boy sitting on a prison bunk, sketchpad in lap. Eyes calm, hands smudged with graphite. Still no name. But this time, the signature was different. At the bottom corner of the drawing, in small, precise handwriting, Camis. The envelope came in a plain brown sleeve. No return address. No logo. No cover letter. Just a small flash drive inside. And a printed line taped across it. "If you won't see them in person, let them stare at you from paper." It landed on the desk of Representative Elijah Cross, a junior congressman from Maryland known for his soft voice and hard files. He plugged it in. At first, silence. Then, 47 images. One by one, they filled the screen. Each portrait was labeled only by date, not of creation but of death. Some faces looked peaceful. Others looked like they'd run out of ways to scream. Each was drawn in a hand, both tender and exacting. Each one demanded attention not with color, but with truth. Cross leaned back in his chair. He was used to policy briefs, to budget graphs, to legislative memos. But this was something no committee had ever shown him. He scrolled to the final folder, lost but not gone. He opened the last file. The boy on the bunk. The sketch pad. The eyes. And then he saw the only signature on the entire drive. Commenter. He sat in silence for a long time. Then he called his chief of staff. "We're changing the plan for Thursday's hearing." "Sir? On prison oversight?" "Yes," Cross said. "We're going to present all of it." "Evidence?" "No," he replied, still staring at the boy on screen. "Witnesses." Elijah Cross had seen numbers his whole life. Statistical disparities, racial breakdowns, graphs showing incarceration spikes and sentencing gaps. He'd used them in speeches, quoted them in committee, argued for reform. But none of those charts ever looked back at him. Not like this. 47 faces. 47 silent accusations. Drawn by someone the system had tried to erase. He couldn't stop thinking about the line. If you won't see them in person, let them stare at you from paper. That wasn't a threat. It was an indictment. And the worst part? It worked. The next morning, he brought the flash drive to his policy team. No preamble, no warm-up. "Forget the talking points," he said. "We're not presenting another bill. We're showing them something they can't redact." Some were skeptical. "This isn't procedure. This won't be admissible. This could backfire." But Cross had already made up his mind. "These drawings are more honest than any chart I've ever shown. And if this chamber won't listen to numbers anymore, maybe it'll listen to faces." 2 days later, the hearing room filled again. Same tables, same suits. But this time, something new sat at the front. An easel. And on it, the sketch of Antoine Mason, drawn by Khalil Moore, signed only with KM. One by one, Cross projected the rest onto the screen. No commentary, just silence. Faces appeared, faded, were replaced. Whispers filled the chamber. Not outrage, recognition. And as the final image lingered, the boy on the bunk, graphite-smudged hands, eyes that refused to look down, Cross spoke. "I don't have a resolution to offer today. I don't have a bill. What I have is a record that someone else risked everything to keep. A record this government didn't bother to make." Then he paused. And for the first time in a long time, the room didn't ask what party he was with. It asked, "Who is this kid? Why is he still in there? What else have we missed?" After the hearing, Cross's office received over 2,000 messages in 24 hours. Not from lobbyists. Not from donors. From people. Mothers, brothers, former inmates, prison staff. Some recognized the faces in the drawings. Some recognized the bruises. A few recognized the silence. And in that flood of response came one message that stopped everything. The boy who drew them is still inside. Cell Block D, Fulton Correctional. No charges since intake. No incident reports. No legal visits. Just buried. Cross stared at the message. Then he stood up. Within 48 hours, his team filed an official oversight request. A motion was passed to review inmate records sealed without cause. And a subpoena was issued to Fulton Correctional for any and all files relating to one, Khalil Moore. What they found was almost nothing. 1-page intake form. No trial transcript. A public defender's name that led to a disconnected number. No record of appeal. No documented family contact. He had been absorbed by the system and disappeared into it. Except for one thing. His drawings, the very thing he used to preserve others, had become the only proof he still existed. Cross met with inside voices privately. "What do we do if we find him?" one staffer asked. Cross didn't hesitate. "We listen." The final act came not with a press conference, but with a letter hand-delivered to the warden of Fulton Correctional. The United States Congress is requesting immediate access to inmate Khalil Moore. As of today, he is no longer invisible. And somewhere in a gray cell, as graphite dust gathered beneath a sketchpad, a quiet boy, with steady hands, finally drew something he didn't think he'd ever live to see. Hope? They never expected it to come from a pencil. Not a protest. Not a viral video. Not a chant or petition. Just a boy with a sketchpad, tucked behind steel bars, drawing faces the world forgot. And somehow, those lines, pressed by fingers no one shook, by hands never invited to speak, broke through everything. Khalil didn't shout. He didn't write a manifesto. He didn't even sign his work until the end. He just remembered people who were being erased, and in doing so, forced the country to remember him. There was no gallery opening, no red carpet, no headline that said, "Hero." But in offices across D.C., in classrooms and churches and courtrooms, people printed those faces, taped them to walls, slid them into folders marked "Reform," stared at them longer than they stared at most reports. Because these weren't statistics. They were eyes, bruises, wrinkles, truth. Khalil had done something no bill could do. He made them feel it. And maybe that's why it mattered. Because the greatest testimony sometimes doesn't come from a podium. It comes from paper, from silence, from someone who was never meant to be seen, but refused to disappear. They say art can't change the system. But what if it doesn't have to? What if it's enough that it changes a person? A room? A moment? What if it doesn't scream, but simply reminds you what human looks like? That's what Khalil's drawings did. Not just for the men he sketched, but for the lawmakers who thought they understood justice, the wardens who thought silence meant peace, and the citizens who thought prison meant deserved. His pencil didn't demand anything. It invited the country to sit with faces it had tossed aside, invited the powerful to witness the powerless, without defense, without spin, without forgetting. And it reminded everyone watching that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is remember. Remember those the system deletes. Remember the names that never made the news. Remember that behind every statistic is someone's brother, someone's father, someone's boy with a gift the world never got to see. Until now. And maybe, just maybe, that kind of remembering is the beginning of justice. Khalil never asked to be a symbol. He didn't draw to change laws. He drew because something inside him refused to forget people the world had already thrown away. No spotlight. No platform. Just pencil and paper. And somehow, that was enough. Enough to reach through walls. Enough to move a Congress. Enough to remind a country what happens when you stop seeing people and start counting them as problems. This wasn't a campaign. It was a boy, in a gray cell, saying the only thing he had left to say. We were here. And that was louder than anyone expected. So now the question is, what will we do with that voice? Will we pass by these sketches like headlines? Click like and move on? Or will we stop? Will we print one out and tape it to our wall? Will we tell someone else the name Khalil Moore? Because remembering is resistance. And visibility is power. And maybe, just maybe, justice doesn't begin with new laws. Maybe it begins with listening to the quietest one in the room. So if this story moved you, if it made you pause, if it made you see someone you would have overlooked yesterday, then don't let it stop here. Share it. Say his name. Ask better questions about the systems around you. And if you believe in stories like this, real stories, hard stories, stories that don't ask for your attention, but earn it, then subscribe to Hidden Justice. Because we're not just here to tell stories. We're here to remember the ones no one else will.